Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Human Decentralised Design. My name is Jacqui Barratt, and I'm the CEO and founder of SALT, and I'm the lucky person to host this amazingly talented panel today. So I'm not going to go through lengthy bios because I have no doubt you've all checked that out for yourselves. But I have got 3 fun facts that I'm going to share with you, and you can decide who they belong to later. But we have got someone on the panel who can run the 100 metres in just over 10 seconds. We have got someone who is second place in the South African Snow Skiing Championships. And we have someone who works part-time as an Uber driver, shifting their children all over town and getting them to rowing at 5 a.m. in the morning. So you work out who's who after this. But today, I promise you a good conversation. We're going to share some good insights, get some thoughts being provoked, hopefully, and get you to go away thinking, and also some really practical tips to take away and think about how you can apply those in your own organisation or in your own life. So let's get into it. The one thing as a panel we all talked about was that businesses just made the seemingly impossible possible, right? Because we were forced to do it. The concept of not being able to work from home and the flexibility all went out the window because we were forced to do it. So is it time to push the reset button? Because as we all agreed, there is no return. There is no going back to what we thought was normal or settling on a new norm. So we want to pose some questions to the amazing panel and hear their thoughts. So the first is, what do you think is posing, I think, the biggest challenge to both the culture of your organisation and organisational design as we move into the next phase? And Claire, I'll throw that out to you to start with, if you don't mind. And for Mel and Hasana, just jump in and add to that if you want to.
Sure. Thank you, Jacqui. Thanks. Look, I mean, that's a big question, obviously. What is the biggest challenge? I actually think as much as we can't go back to the old way, as much as we've had to change through necessity, and I think there's still, people gravitate to their old behaviour. People like to do what they've always done. And I think the biggest challenge is actually leveraging all the positives that have come out of this, this disruption, looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and making sure that we don't revert back to the old ways. So once we are allowed back in the office, whenever that might be, making sure that we really take the most of this opportunity to make sure that, like, we've kind of gone forward leaps and bounds. In some organisations, they were really well prepared for this. Others have leapt forward 5 or 10 years in terms of their infrastructure and their planning around things. They've sort of really jumped forward when they were perhaps not prepared. So it's all about, I think, seizing the opportunity and not slipping back. I've got people, we've done a lot of sort of pulse testing around government. So I'm from the government sector in Victoria. We've done a lot of pulse testing and kind of testing with people how they're feeling about things. And it really is our staff expectation that we're not going backwards. So, people have got completely new expectations about how, where and when they will be able to work. Work is sort of becoming what we do rather than where we go. And so the challenge is to really work our organisations around accommodating that, really, which in a much more ongoing basis.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen actually just how quickly organisations have been able to adapt. And I think it's surprised a lot of people. I think some of those more traditional leaders who perhaps thought, there's certain business units that couldn't work from home have now actually realised it's possible. I think one of the challenges off the back of this is how do you replicate some of those more informal kind of water cooler conversations. With Zoom, we tend to be quite polite and it's very scheduled, and you schedule a meeting and you ask somebody if you can have a chat to them. And so how do you, keep the pulse of the business and those conversations you hear going on around you, and what can you do, and what technology can you use to try and kind of replicate that more informal conversation and touch points that happen when you're in the office, and thinking through what you need to invest in, what you have at the moment, which you perhaps need to push more from a utilization perspective, and what else can you do with your teams to kind of keep that culture, keep that pulse, keep that more informal side, rather than it all being very, you know, kind of scheduled and formal, and kind of shifting it to what you might get in the office when you have those, you know, corridor conversations.
It's a good point, isn't it? Because we touched on this the other day. In one way, it's more informal because you're all at home and you're relaxed and ready for that. But you're having these very structured catch-ups so that you do touch everybody and connect with everybody. But the fact is, you miss that the pulse of the office, I think was the word that you used, and those water cooler conversations. How do you create that without it feeling artificial or too forced? You know, and it is a challenge, isn't it, to do that.
It is.
Hasana, have you got any thoughts you want to add to that? No? All right, we will keep moving forward. What do you think are the key changes we're going to have to make, that where we've got no choice but to consider what the organisation culture looks like moving forward? Because we've chatted informally offline about the fact that the culture naturally is going to change because you're not having people necessarily engage the same way. The way you hire might be different around culture now because you're not necessarily hiring to the same concerns that you might have had if people are in a very disparate way. So what do you believe the key changes that we're going to have to make? It's just not negotiable.
I think when you look at some of the HR, you know, processes and some of that kind of end-to-end life cycle, I guess, from an employee perspective, I think the one that jumps out to me is onboarding, because we know how critical that is to really drive that initial engagement, you know, from somebody who's really joining the business. And of course, you know, more recently there's been some great technologies out there which can kind of, you know, drive some of these touch points, but that was really working off the back of the assumption that actually, yes, they'll be able to go into the office and perhaps pick up their laptop and have meetings with people face to face, in addition to perhaps automating some of that more kind of paper-based side of it. So I think there's a real opportunity there and a real need to kind of rethink that onboarding piece. And how do you get that real engagement up front? How do you give them that sense of, you know, being part of the family? How do you get them to embed those relationships and build relationships when actually, you know, it's all technology, it maybe not be their comfort zone, they don't know who to go to, where to go to, they may not feel comfortable approaching people all the time with questions, you know, they don't know them well enough to just ping them on Zoom or whatever it might be. And so I think there's going to be a real need to rethink that whole onboarding piece, you know, from a new joiner's perspective, and thinking, well, actually, you know, if you're in the office, you turn to the person next to you, but what do you do if you're new? You don't know who to go to, and so how do you manage that?
And also the observation piece with onboarding, because sometimes that's part of the learning, isn't it? Is through observation, hanging out with someone else, watching how it all happens and comes together to build that bigger picture, and that becomes harder to do. Absolutely. Claire, Hasana, anything you want to add to that?
I think the other thing around, you know, absolute game changers, and something we have no option but to think about, as we said before, is around our flexibility policies. And even organisations that are really well equipped in terms of flexibility policies, this is taking it to the next level. So what we've seen is organisations having to accommodate a really broad range of caring responsibilities and other work-life responsibilities that people have been juggling over this time: school drop-offs, kids at home, looking after parents, all sorts of things that people have been juggling, and we have accommodated it. So how do we make sure we continue to accommodate that, because that's what people will be looking for. So, you know, people that might be starting work early and taking a break for 3 hours in the middle of the day to look after their kids, and then working late, or doing different times or different arrangements that work for them. How do we accommodate that going forward? I think is a really big one as well.
It is a biggie, isn't it? Because as we've touched on previously, that whole concept of work-life balance it has changed, and we've said it's a bit more work-life blend, right? And there's pros and cons with that, as we've discussed, in terms of, we've talked about productivity, and we'll get to measurement and performance management a bit later, but productivity, we say, has gone up. Is it because people are working longer hours? Is it simply because they're in their home working, and it sort of blends? What does that look like? But you're so right, Claire, we've accepted so much more that we probably in the past haven't accepted. As you said, been okay for someone to realize that they're in charge of the children on home-based learning for the next 3 hours, and previously that would have been potentially frowned upon, or questioned around, oh, are they really working? Are they doing these things? Forgetting that they might have jumped on at 4:30 and then carried on for 3 hours. How do we keep that conversation going? How do we show that? How do we demonstrate it and make people feel comfortable with it beyond this period? Because I think this period's forced us to, but it's very natural for us to then go back to going, okay, but that was then, this is now, let's get back to how we were. So how do we drive that more effectively?
I think we focus on outcomes. I think really you went into me far more focused on what people are delivering and how effective that is, and moving away from time at the desk or time that you see someone in the hallway or in the office, because that's gone now. That's shifted. Exactly. So a real focus on outcomes.
And thinking more about teaming, right? So obviously a lot of organizations are moving towards thinking about different projects and then pulling people in with the right skills for that period of time. And so that, I think, in itself provides some flexibility to do other things, because you aren't doing that typical kind of 9 to 5. You're actually being pulled in, depending on your skill set, into different projects. And so I think that that itself will kind of lend towards that. I mean, that's quite a big shift, but a lot of businesses are moving towards that teaming, focusing on skills. And so there isn't the need for you to always be at your desk, that typical kind of 9 to 5. It's project-based, it's outcome-based, as you said, Claire.
It's interesting. Morgan Williams, so just a shout out to the audience. This feels like real live stuff now. Morgan Williams, whoever's in the audience, has sent us a bit of a comment, and I think I should read it because I think it just supports what we've said there. So I think the big opportunity here is to use this as an opportunity to think about what work is rather than what jobs are. Work is something that needs to be done by people with specific skills who are available when the work needs to be done. That's a different and far more flexible construct than a job which is actually quite restrictive. And that's a really interesting point, Morgan. And I don't know if you read the Gartner research recently, but that's exactly what they were talking about, was looking at the skills rather than looking at the job and bringing those two. So given that all that's good, and I think every one of us, I think probably everyone even in the audience would be saying, yep, that's absolutely where we want to be. What do leaders then need to do to ensure that they still remain effective for their teams? And then what support do they need from us to help them? Because there are some leaders that go, oh, well, I'm not, as you mentioned the other day, Mel, I don't need to do anything differently, I carry on. But the reality is there's probably some things that we do need to do differently. So what do leaders need to do? What help do they need from us to do it?
Yeah, I think it's quite a big change for leaders, and a lot of what we're focusing on, right, is how do you manage a remote team? Because beforehand you may have had a couple of people out, or you had teams in on different days, whereas now everybody's out the office, and it is a challenge. I think there's a number of challenges. I think first of all, it isn't natural for everybody to kind of be on a screen and on video, and so there's a bit of an art and a skill and a comfort that needs to come with being able to be natural and kind of bring your whole self across, on screen, and for everyone to have that trust and that comfort zone with, with being on a screen. And then there's the kind of focus around, well, how do you pull your teams together, and how do you do this kind of setup regularly enough so it becomes part of the norm? And I think it's about setting up that kind of cadence around having regular or daily stand-ups where everyone dials in, you have a quick chat, or it's a quick informal conversation. You have your formal one-on-ones. You think about what needs to be adjusted from some of those kind of annual processes, what support they need, what training do they need. But I think it's setting that cadence and then sticking to it, so people have that comfort knowing they're going to have a daily stand-up or a weekly stand-up with the whole team. You build in some fun, you build in some of that more informal stuff, whether it's Friday drinks or morning tea, catch up. So it's used for both the kind of formal and the informal. And I think the more you do that, the more comfortable people become that this is actually the communication platform for whatever we need it for. And they have that cadence or that comfort that it's going to kind of keep happening. So try to replicate the office environment, but on the screen, and that kind of comfort level will come.
Absolutely. Welcome, Hasana, everybody. We had a few technology problems before, so we've got Hasana with us, which is fabulous. Claire, you were just going to say something, so I'll jump in and then we can go to Hattie after you.
Melanie covered it all. I think I couldn't agree more. I think it all comes down to very deliberate and thoughtful communication. So and also just really being quite mindful about your operating rhythm, as you said, Melanie, like one-on-ones, meetings, how you're cascading information, how you're having informal catch-ups. I think the other thing that's really important that leaders are going to need to focus on more and more is how to build trust in teams. So, when you've had a well-formed team that have just moved out of the office and they're all working from home, that's okay, because there was already trust established in that team.
Yeah.
But what about when you're onboarding new people, as you said earlier, Melanie, or people are starting in new roles, or you're creating new teams and you haven't actually met and you don't actually have a foundational level of trust. That trust is always there at the start. So people kind of say, oh, we're in it together. Trust is quick to form, but very quick to dissolve if there's not a strong focus. So I think it's also about sort of thinking about how do we build those interpersonal connections and then bring people on the journey, sort of aligning around purpose. That will help to kind of sort of keep the trust or keep the momentum.
Have you got any tips, Claire, on how to do that? I mean, you can't force trust. I get it. It comes with time, and I often think trust is built. I take this from Brené Brown, who I love, but trust is built in the little moments, not the big moments. But how do you try and either accelerate that or create that when you, as you said, when this person's new, hasn't got those team connections? What are some things you could do, you think?
Well, from a leadership perspective, I think that, as you say, small moments matter. But I think creating opportunity to actually build those informal connections. Ask people about their dog. Hear about where they went on holiday. Take the time to get to know people as you would do in the office. I think it can become quite transactional when we're on video, and it shouldn't be. I think these are people we spend a lot of time with. We would spend a lot of time with people at work, so we want to get to know them. Doesn't mean we all have to be friends, but just taking the time to get to know people is really important. And I think also, as leaders, I think it's also very much about role modeling. So, you build trust when you are consistent, when you're, messaging and your behaviour. You build trust when you're, role modeling the values that you're talking about in the organisation. So, consistency in your own behaviour, I think, is also really important.
Which is interesting, and I want to pull on a point a bit that Mel, you touched on before, but ties into Claire about bringing your whole self. But before I do, Hasana, anything you want to add to that from what you've seen in terms of what leaders need and the support from us and what they might need to do differently?
Yeah, do that. And thank you for finally letting me come into this.
We thought you're still on a visa, so we were taking time to just check it before you're allowed in.
Yeah, and we're not going to say anything about technology, working for a technology company and the technology not working. So I'm currently on my phone, but that worked on that one. So thank you for that. So sorry for missing the first sort of 20 minutes of it.
No problem.
On that one. I think the interesting thing I found actually since we all went into this, trying to live and work while it's all actually now combined, is that some of those aspects around, to your point, asking people around, their lives and those things, we're now seeing much wider of people's lives because it's all in the background. It's not. Yeah. It's literally there. So, we've sat on calls where, there's kids everywhere, there's cats, there's dogs, you're getting to see a lot more of people's lives because we're effectively bringing that in, that life piece is now coming into your work, which really, really helps to, put a bit of a tie together. You're actually seeing those things a little bit more. The challenge, I think, is also how do we support people with this, where it can be quite isolating as well and quite lonely. And that, you know, there was commentary around sort of the onboarding piece. It was very odd, you know, when we made the shift and, you know, pulled the plug out and said, right, no more interviewing on sites, you know, we're all going into virtual mode. So we were onboarding people remotely for it. What we found was interesting is some of the report to that is because we spent so much time making sure that the onboarding process was done so well, we had a couple of new hires say to us it was the best they ever experienced, and we were quite nervous about it to go, you know, is this going to go well? But again, they're now coming back into the office 4 months after they started. And that's now taking a bit of time to sort of go, oh, so you're the person I see on this little box piece, to actually form those teams back.
Does it almost feel like you're do they feel like they're almost restarting that onboarding process? Because one is I onboarded out here, and then I've come into the office and do that.
Yeah,
is
very
there anything
much.
that you think that you did with that onboarding process, Asana, that really did make it such a good experience? Was there any little tips that you say that you tried to do, being more cognizant of the fact that they weren't, you know?
Yeah, coming in. So the interesting part is that, you know, onboarding, it sort of falls in that gap piece between the end of talent acquisition and the beginning of the hiring manager becoming the leader. And sometimes within those gaps, that's where the experience completely falls down. We were a lot tighter together. We were a lot tighter with the hiring managers to go, okay, so how are we doing this? What have you got booked in? How are you introducing them to the teams? Like, you know, really making sure that first few weeks is absolutely locked and loaded all the way through. And we kept a lot closer in touch. So where we would normally, you know, there is a lot of, you know, experience where we still keeping a touch pace as somebody's coming into the organization, we extended that. So where you might go, oh, look, we'll have a bit of a touch base. It's like, okay, well, let's extend that out by 2-3 weeks. Let's just keep a touch base with them. Let's put some calls in, put some, you know, some, you know, how are you doing? Couple of Slack messages. How are you finding it? Any problems? To really ensure that they're actually getting their way into the doors, and we're keeping them.
Absolutely, that's the
always
key.
helpful.
As a good recruiter, don't just get them, hold on to them, keep them.
No.
We touched on it before, and obviously going back to Morgan's point about skills and Claire, you mentioned about outcomes now, you know, rather than time at the desk and those sorts of things. But how do you think companies are going to have to shift looking at their measurement and their performance management of people, and what do they need to do at both an organizational level and as an individual level, right? Because transparency, a lot of people have been talking about the need for more transparency, and data is going to drive some of that. But what do you see happening, and both at org level and then at an individual level?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and I must admit, I think, you know, performance management at an individual level is tricky. There's a lot of research that sort of says, hey, we should throw it completely out the door. Much more informal, regular conversations. And then there's other research that says, no, it's really critical, and we should have key points 3 times a year, you know, so it's very, I think the jury's out on individual performance management. I think it's about what works for your organization, and it might be very different for organizations. But what I do think is perhaps some of the capabilities that we're requiring around agility and flexibility and, you know, adapting to, you know, what your job might be 1 month might have changed in this COVID. You know, you might be doing very, very different project work. You might be doing, you might have had to work to kind of scale up things in the organisation or scale down. You might have been shifted. And, you know, I think so both at an organisational and an individual level, that agility and the willingness to try new things and work new ways is actually business critical. So I think we need to be measuring that both as an organisation, but also recruiting people for that as well. So recruiting, with that,
that's an interesting point. Is that looking for that learning,
to adapt to change and thrive in a changing environment.
I'll come back to that.
I think what this is exactly, and this is you know, what this has given all of us, right, is a unique opportunity like many generations haven't had before, to really kind of reshape and shake up and change the way everything is happening. And so what I'd love to see is the move away from position descriptions you know, which has been around for hundreds of years. And could you not get a particular, come in with a skill set and then you team on projects, right? And so that is, and then it's the outcome of the project rather than a, you know, a thesis of a position description. And, you know, if you move outside of that, it's not your role. I just think that is the big change I'd love to see. Because it still boxes you, right? And it's just not the way organizations are moving now. It's very much about, we want a particular skill set, and with that skill set, we're going to use you every which way we can. And there's some great projects, and you're going to move around, and you're going to get this diversity, and we're going to put you where we need you, rather than this is your job and you stay in the box. And so I think this has given us that opportunity to really look at everything and see what we can tweak and what we can challenge and what we can change, like we've never had before. And everyone's a bit more open to it now, which is, you know, which is quite an opportunity for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the when you're talking about that, it does make me quietly giggle, because it's like RDs and PDs completely agree, and they can run for pages and pages and pages, but they box people in. I mean, one of the things I was so impressed about when I, you know, turned up to Squiz is that we don't have PDs and we don't have RDs. We have signposts. Now, a signpost is a one-pager. And it basically gives you, it does what it says on the tin. It's the signpost to, this is how to be successful in your role, but it's got enough of a gap on both sides of that to allow you to shift, to allow the agility and the ambiguity as your roles are moving. And it's more around, you know, this is the results. These are the questions that you would answer in this role to be successful. But it's also the purpose of the role. So what's your core purpose of the role? And what are the characteristics and the behaviors and the DNA you're going to display to enable to do that? They are fantastic, but they're also challenging for people, you know, where we have new leaders coming through and they're used to the RDs and they're saying, oh, can we do this? I'm like, okay, so we're going to have a conversation about it. We don't do it like that. And it stretches people. It forces them to not go, well, it's not in my RD. I can't do that. So it allows a lot more agility to it. And we actually have them, they're open. Everybody can see them globally. They're, you know, so you can look at anybody's signpost that you wanted to. You can see the whole thing actually there, and we keep them updated, and they permanently almost stay in draft. And I do think that that is absolutely the way forward, that, you know, we need to have much more openness and be comfortable about that grey and ambiguity to allow shifting. You know, to your guys' point, is absolutely, I think, the way to go. So yeah, I'm very, very impressed about being able to work with those.
Oh, look, I just think it's essential. It's probably one of my, in 27 years of recruitment, one of my biggest frustrations. In fact, I just wrote a blog around clients or organisations who say, must have 10 years experience in XYZ. And it's like, oh my goodness. All it's about, you know, I often say it's no different to recruitment. You can have someone who's got 10 years recruitment experience and all they've done is repeated 1 year 10 times, you know, and it's what you've done in that time. And that's where we've got to get people opening up their minds to that flex of what it is. And I think in that Gartner research, I thought it was really interesting. They looked at, you know, the Facebooks, the Apples, the Amazons and the Googles of the world, as they do as a benchmark in some areas. And they looked at the skills of a developer. And there was 10 skills under both, but they were not. There was not a single skill that actually was the same in their top 10 skills. So again, focusing on what's right for your organisation and what you want to see, as opposed to what you think needs to be in it, because this is what the title of the role is, which I think is which is critical. I just want to focus a little bit on the outcomes piece, because I think it's one of the biggest challenges for business and people to get their head around, right? Because as you said, still there are many organisations that measure your success on what time you get into the office and what time you leave the office and the time you have at the desk and all of those sorts of things. And I also appreciate that unless inputs are happening, outcomes don't happen either in some organisations. So how do you try to measure that? What do you think you can do, and how can we use data perhaps more effectively, or what you suggest we could do more effectively to give leaders confidence, but also still measure that, you know, because at the end of the day, it's a commercial outcome, right? We do need to get outcomes. So how do we help that through this period? Because that's often where the trust is built too, right? I can't see you and can't see anything happening, and and the outcomes aren't coming yet. So is it truly going on?
It's funny because I always think, someone could be, not performing well in their job, sitting at the desk next to you at work, and they're
Absolutely.
sitting right there, and they may not be performing very well, and just because they're working from home doesn't change that. And likewise, if someone's performing well, working from home is not going to change that. So I think we need to really just I think that's just something that people, forget about. Just because you're sitting next to them doesn't mean managing their performance any better. But I think in terms of outcomes, I think it's really, we've got so much data. There's so much data. Do we have the right data though? So, and, everyone's working in different industries. But, I take myself, for example, if, no one cares how many leadership programs I deliver. If they're not well attended, if people don't find them valuable, if they're not shifting people's mindsets, if managers are not seeing a difference in behaviour, if people aren't feeling that it was a worthwhile investment, if people aren't more prepared to do their jobs. So, it's meaningful metrics in whatever your skill and whatever your field is the metric actually aligned to the outcome? Because your outcome isn't about delivering 100 leadership programs. Your outcome is about building leadership behaviour, for example. So just being really thoughtful about those metrics.
Yeah, you've always got to look at it as whatever metric you're doing has to be of value, and you have to start from like, what is the problem we're trying to solve for? And particularly within the HR community, a lot of what we do is iterative. It is, to your point, it's like, we can all deliver fantastic leadership programs, but if we don't get them, the leaders, to actually take that on board and then reinforce and then do that every day and keep working at it, that's an iterative process. It isn't like, it'd be great if we could just sheep dip them and go, right, here you go, off you go. You're good to go. It's very challenging, therefore, then to show, the successful outcomes in the P&C world, very hard. There's some areas that are very easy to measure and go, right, this L&D program did this, and TA as an example, you can go, right, we recruited this many at this amount and it took this long, and here are the outcomes. But it's always pulling that back to the metric has to matter for the organization. And I think we don't do a good enough job sometimes about talking around that, or talking about the fact that this isn't going to be overnight success either.
And I think some of those, those regular conversations or check-ins, or however you are managing, performance as a business, is thinking about how you can tweak and change that process to have more of these individual based performance check-ins, whatever form that has, right? And make it outcome based or goal based. And how are you having these regular, whether it's sort of formal or whatever it might be, but how are you holding people accountable? How are you making sure that they are, they have the opportunity to update you as a leader as to how they're doing, and you have the opportunity to kind of check in, and then you hold each other accountable throughout the year. Otherwise, you do it once a year, you get to the end of the year and there's a whole lot of surprises. So how are you having these more regular, ongoing conversations, which is a challenge everywhere, right? And managers all say they're doing it, and we know none of them are. And so how formal do you make it, and how informal do you allow it to be? But it's got to happen, right? Because otherwise it's we get to the end of the year and there's these surprise conversations happening. And then from a business perspective too, right? It's we focus a lot on client satisfaction, and so that is a big kind of metric for us as far as how are we delivering. And so you need this internal process between a leader and an associate or employee, tracking how they are delivering individually, and then from a business perspective or a team perspective or a project perspective, what is the client saying, and then kind of pulling those two together. Because it's you don't always have the metric from those check-ins, but from a satisfaction perspective you do, and it's how you kind of align those.
We have we've got very much a Marcus Buckingham ethos, so it's a real reinforcement of regular one-on-one check-ins every single week, and they're very straightforward in terms of what are you working on, so what are your short-term priorities, so that enables you as a leader to course correct if you need to, or say, hey, look, this part needs more information, or you need to be able to focus on this bit, and then how can I help you? So if you're doing a lot of that, it forces that near-term piece. You can course correct as you need to, you can reinforce where you need to, and it therefore then doesn't mean that you have to have those yearly things, which we don't do either, which is fantastic, because it's things like, interesting conversation we were having in the office a couple of, virtually office a couple of weeks ago, was that when you do those performance ones, and of course it's the scoring piece, and then you find a bunch of leaders don't score people as they should, because they know they're going to have a difficult conversation, and they go, oh, you were a 3, you're a 3, so and yet that person's almost heading down a path of performance management. Everyone goes, you joking me? And that then also impacts your REM as well, because of course a lot of that falls off it. So your markings falls into your REM, that falls into everything else. So I don't see necessarily the major value, and I've worked in large organizations where it was absolutely the case, but I don't know where we arrived at this was the way to do it, but I do absolutely think we should really question that. Why do we do it? What's the outcome for that?
Absolutely. Just want to shout out to the audience again, because we've got a really engaged audience, which is fabulous. So Oscar has said, no, I've lost one because they're coming in so thick and fast. Wilson Lim has said, being in a global organisation, we've always been working in a virtual environment. Our transition to digital platforms like Microsoft Office Teams have increased information transparency, collaboration and productivity. A recent Pulse survey revealed that people found that productivity has increased by measuring deliverables instead of the online time. Provide staff the flexibility of performing during their most effective time, which I think is a fabulous point, isn't it? Because we all know that we're not highly productive 8 hours a day. Nobody is, right? So you all know when your peak time is and when you're most effective. And I think we now need to be a little bit more tolerant of creating environments that accept that. Oscar has said a lot of leaders push back a lot of leaders push back on the signpost approach as they don't understand how to hold staff accountable. The education piece on this is crucial. So Hasana, I'm going to give you a little task. Given the signpost is your baby, it'd be great if you could perhaps...
not mine, my boss's, but fantastic.
Even if we could perhaps interview you after this about the signpost and some tips you can give us around how to help people do that, because I think that's
absolutely
critical.
Absolutely.
Also got a comment from Abi, and Abi said, organisational transformation needs people interaction over virtual setup. Are there signs large transformation, big room planning is now history? Tools of the trade like Miro, Mural, Microsoft Teams have been helping. However, they are band-aid solutions. He said, how long will band-aid solutions sustain? I want to put that out there. Do we need to also create opportunities to bring people together as well, and not just say that that's where we are?
Definitely. So in government, I mean, I don't work in a global organisation. I'm just in Victoria, but we have regions and we have regional staff. But what we're looking at is a blended model where we're thinking for the future, saying, okay, well, our data has shown us that people want to work remotely more than ever. They want this to be the future. So they're saying to us, I'd really like to work remotely 2 or 3 days a week, but I do still want to come in. I do still want to connect with people. So we're looking at a blended model where we have the main offices for us, which are core offices, working from home, but also looking at creating some sort of government hubs where, and then for the private sector, it might just be different types of hubs where you might actually have workspaces where people come together from all different organisations, but you can book a desk, or that you can come and meet a few colleagues, and it might be stakeholders from your own organisation, or it might be stakeholders from other organisations, but creating a much more diverse and flexible hub as another alternative. So, you might be able to travel an hour into the city 1 day a week, work around the corner from a hub 2 days a week, and also work from home. So just being able to, again, create options for people so that people have more choice, I think, is key.
I think so.
I'd echo that as well. I think it's more around having collaborative spaces that enable then that still face-to-face time. We've got sort of like agile teams and squads, so they're enabled to to come in and spend that time together, but then not need to externally. And as a global company, we're also running around with the sun, so it also means that where you have to have conversations in the US early doors, you can do that, and in the evenings back up to sort of like the UK and Poland, you can do that as well. So I think it's going to be a blend of both. I think we're going to be more blended than not. And some offices, I think, may not return. And I think, you know, where we also go, right, well, we're not going to return to that office. There's just absolutely no point. The productivity is still there. Everybody's doing really great. And we're spending God knows how much money. It also then frees up for us to go, well, how can we take that money and redeploy it somewhere else? Yeah, you know, you could redeploy some of that into wellness programs, into leadership training, into some R&D, whatever. I think there's a financial benefit for us to having a less of a footprint. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
I think so. And I think the reality is we will never all be in the office as on the same day as our teams again. You know what I mean? We may all go in 1 or 2 days a week. It's probably going to be a different day to the rest of the team. And so I think to some degree, this is building a comfort level with this way of working. And so, for example, we always say when we have meetings at work, you have to put your camera on because so much of communication is in the seeing, right? In the body language and the facial expressions. And so it's developing a comfort level with this way of working because it will always be there now. You know, it may be that you're at home and your whole team's in the office and you've got to dial in. And so I think some of it is just getting comfortable, making sure you have your camera on, you know, you're making sure people are included as you would in a meeting room if somebody's perhaps a bit quieter, etc. So I think to some degree it's getting over this hurdle of actually this kind of virtual meeting, because I just don't think that will change. We will never all be in on the same day. It's going to be, it's absolutely going to be that blended approach and a comfort level.
Yeah, I think what I love about this is it's the aspect of you probably, and we all will, and everybody listening will have dealt with the various managers who are like, if I can't see them, they're not working. So like who fought vehemently every time there was a trying attempt to do flexibility or have people work from home, and they were like not happening type thing. And I remember having a conversation with the leader when I'd started first at Squiz, and he was really uncomfortable with not seeing the people, right? Fabulous guy, really uncomfortable. Stay in conversation with him recently, and he's like, yeah, I take it all back. Actually, it's been great. Our productivity's gone up. We've actually been winning more business. It's been better for us in terms of our clients to spread out remotely. He was like, yeah, no, I take it back. It's been great. And that was just like,
I want to touch on two points because I'm mindful of time, and I really want, these are two important points that I think people are going to want some insight into. How do organizations manage the well-being though for people they can't see? What else do we need to think about? Because does it change the traditional work health and safety type models that we've had to, and we've talked about the whole person's coming to work, right? And we are far more aware that life may not be so easy, kids are around, dogs, sharing houses, all those sorts of things. How are we going to do that? How are we going to help manage well-being more effectively?
I think we'll see. Sorry, Claire, you go.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I think we're going to see this become a lot more focused, right, and have dedicated teams to the health and safety, because you're right. What is, and to some degree we're still navigating this. So what is the risk from an employee perspective if you've got someone working at home who hasn't got the correct setup, etc., or you know, not the right seating, and they got to go to physio if they got backache, whatever it might be. And so to some degree we're still navigating that. And what is the employee's obligation? Should they pay for internet access? Should they contribute to electricity? And I think we're still finding our way. Some businesses are doing that, some aren't, some are still figuring out what they do. I think we're still navigating that, but I think this is going to take more conversations with more people more regularly. You know, more so than we would have done in the office, where you can actually see people at their desk and you wave at them. I think from a leader perspective, you're going to have absolutely make a conscious effort to have these informal check-ins more regularly with people and make sure they've got the camera on and check they're okay. And that trust is going to be important, because they could be sharing a room with 4 or 5 roommates or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
But I think it is a lot more conversations with a lot more people. And our CEO was saying the other day, he used to travel probably 80% of the time, and now he isn't. He says, actually, I've engaged with more people in the last 4 months than I have in the last 4 years, because I'm having a lot more one-on-ones and I'm seeing people, and it's kind of more intimate than a big town hall. It seems different. And so I think it's going to have to be a lot more conversations, so you're kind of able to engage and understand, you know, where they're at. Do they have everything they need? Does it look to you like they're okay when they're on camera in their home environment or wherever they are? So I think that'll be key.
Clear?
And I think also just picking up on the increased focus, as you say, it's just going to become much more important. It's always been important, that's not the right word. You know, it's really putting a spotlight on the well-being element, not just kind of the traditional health and safety, but the real well-being, mental health. So, you know, thinking about things like isolation, or thinking about, you know, all the stuff around potential burnout, boundaries, people feeling that they're always on call or always working. That's not okay. We still need to have boundaries around our work. We still need to have manageable workloads, and we need to make sure that we're managing those things in terms of mental health. And even just being on video all the time is tiring. So just thinking about the different types of wellness issues that might come to a head, really, because I think it's different types of things will come up over time.
I want to ask about the boundaries. Sorry, Claire, I was going to ask about the boundaries and how much responsibility also sits with an individual then, because, you know, we've just talked that they're not going to do an 8:30 till 5:30 or whatever. So, you know, they might shoot off at 3 hours a day, and then they might be on at 9 o'clock at night. And it's like, oh, should I freak out? Like I said to one of my team, I got an email at 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, what are they doing? That's crazy stuff. But I also don't know if she did, you know, if she took 6 hours that day to go and do so. I really don't know. So how do we also get that personal responsibility and accountability to be really open about how they're managing their day and doing this, and it not to be a judgment, but a bit so I go, okay, I don't need to panic here because they've got this under control.
I think that it's about management and employee communication is really, really important. I also think it's about team protocols. So visibility across the team about how everyone is working and how they prefer to work, just broadly. So for example, in my team, just as an example, we have a little protocol. We have an out of the office kind of protocol where we say, you know, so-and-so's, and when I say out of the office, I mean not working. Out of the office, but we don't. We're quite specific. So we have a little protocol where people email the team if they're not available for the whole day, or if they're taking a half day, or if they're doing whatever. You know, if it's more than say 2 or 3 hours, we need to let everyone know. But being really careful about our language. So we actually say, oh, I'm on leave, I'm doing this, or I've got an appointment and so I'm available after 11 or whatever, as opposed to just kind of not being available. What does that mean? Does it mean you're working? Does it mean you're not working? Because we want to respect people's needs.
Absolutely.
We also want to respect if people are unwell, that we just, you know, we don't contact them, and, you know, we're not going to be calling them into meetings when they're sick, things like that. So just day-to-day communication, protocols among the team about how we communicate. I think they really help, but again, so there's responsibility there at an organisational level, a team level, and an individual level.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect I think you've got to it is the maturity, not just of the organisation but the leaders as well. And it depends where you are on that journey pace. There is some organisations that have banned online meetings between certain hours to enforce it, to actually force that breakage in the day, or some others have gone for like no meeting Fridays. I think, you know, individually for organisations, you've got to look at it and go, hand on heart, how mature are we in this process, and how mature are our leaders to do this? Or to your point, if you've got leaders that send out emails like, you know, late on a Sunday because it works best for them, you know, I've been there before, but not realising for the staff member goes, oh, I need to respond immediately as well then. And then suddenly it's, you know, it then plays into all of that, you know, how are you actually looking after people properly?
We do a little signature block, just sort of telling people what we do, so that whenever you receive an email from me, it says at the bottom, hi, I work flexibly and I'm not available on Wednesdays, and I pick up my kids at 4 o'clock, for example.
Yeah.
Love it. I want to touch on talent acquisition, because obviously that's a key one. Given more people are going to continue to work from home or blended in some shape or form, how does this impact a talent acquisition strategy? And does it open up some new talent pools to us that perhaps we haven't been so aware of or so engaged with previously?
Oh, enormously so, because you're no longer, it's just like, way. It isn't just physical geography in terms of, you know, okay, so in New York, our offices are in Fifth Avenue, well, were sort of still not occupied. You know, you would have to recruit to be able to enable somebody to get into that
Yeah.
Now we don't, and we've got client groups all over the States. So this means that then the talent is now much more open around where we can find those people. I think the other aspect I think we've or maybe not thought about was around accessibility as well. So where we look at diversity and how we attract more diversity into organizations, one level that's really highly underrepresented is those that have a disability. And if you think about it, you go, well, if you're more working at home now, most people that, obviously people with a disability, their home environment is suited and set up for them. Yeah, we're not having to say, right, you need to get out of that, somehow find your way on some public transport, which is also painful, get yourselves into the offices, which is also painful, and maybe that's not set up. It also means that we maybe open up doors to more people with accessibility to be able to work more effectively because they're working from home and that environment's set up for them. And I think those are real opportunities in a lot of those different areas for us to look at.
Definitely.
I agree. And I think it's going to be challenging hiring leaders, right? When they say, I've got a role based in Sydney, for example. Well, why? Can it not be anywhere within the time zone? Because I think it really opens it up, and it doesn't have to be even in country. It could be any time zone that's similar, anywhere in Asia Pacific. There's a couple of hours difference. And so I think it's for the TA team to start challenging that and to own it, because otherwise there's a tendency to kind of continue as we are and replace like for like. And so using those opportunities to really say, well, actually, based on the research I have, I can see there's a great talent pool in India for this role, and why don't we tap into that? It's this role supporting the US anyway, or whatever it might be. And so really challenging the location of those roles. I think it's a huge opportunity for the TA market to, again, drive some significant change.
Yeah. I also, the other one I thought about as well is supporting of the rural areas where, a lot of time and money is quite rightly spent building up availability of roles and jobs for people in rural communities and supporting them. The fact we're now working remotely, and this will continue on, means that you will be able to bring the jobs to the people as opposed to trying to bring the people to the jobs. I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Clea, I know you've got some views on this.
Oh, look, I was just going to add that, I think the reverse works as well, is that, if we can't adapt to, and if organisations can't, take this new way of working forward and be really open in where people are located and all that kind of thing, people they'll move with their feet and they will go to an organisation that can accommodate them. So I think, don't underestimate expectations of employees that are changing. And, they'll go to an organisation that can give them that choice about how and when and where they work. So, you might lose out if you can't, as an organisation, if it's something that you can't, really harness.
Accommodate, yeah. And it's interesting too, because it'll open up in my mind, and I think you touched on this earlier, Claire, around the carer responsibility. There's a whole talent pool that perhaps have taken themselves out of circulation because it's not as easy to juggle. And now we're saying actually juggling's cool, it's actually normal, and it's what we do. And my friend out there, Morgan Williams, who I've never met, but you're a good person, says we don't have to all be on at the same time. I have a colleague with a toddler who works from lunchtime onwards, and we use collaborative tools to capture her thoughts at handoff points. We certainly overlap with her working hours, but we definitely don't need the same working hours. And look, I remember when I set up Salt in New Zealand 17 years ago, my concept then was I wanted the best people, right? So I needed to be as flexible as possible to have the best people. So I had people doing job share 4 days a week, all sorts of different combinations, start at 7:30, finish easy. And it's funny, as my business got bigger, that I stopped. I don't think I'd stopped doing it, but we limited it more. And now I look and think we had it so right back then, because it did allow us to attract the best talent in the marketplace and allow people to do all the things we're talking about today. So I think there's a willing, and now we've just got to really drive it home and make it happen and keep forcing the uncomfortable conversations to make people take action, really. And I want to pick up on a point you said right at the beginning, Claire, before we sign off. You talked about agility and change and so I know for us a tool we use with some of our clients when we're testing, and certainly in our own organisation, is looking at the whole learning agility. with reasoning, because that tells us, because I think that's why I hate the word the new norm, because it gives me this feeling that we're going to get comfortable again and it's just going to settle, and we're hoping that it just keeps evolving, right? And we keep growing and developing. Is there anything you would advise people particularly to be looking at when you're hiring and you're looking for that adaptability to change or learning agility? Anything you would suggest that they focus on?
Oh, look, I'm no recruitment expert, so I'm sure others. So tell us about, when you've really been really agile and, completely, tell us about a project that was completely off track. How did you get it back on track? Or tell us about a time when something completely failed and what did you learn from it? Let's sort of put some different questions in there and some tricky questions in there, and mix things up a little bit, I suppose.
Mel?
Yeah, very much. That's the right.
Oh, sorry.
Questions to ask. No, I was just going to say that's exactly the right questions to ask, because if you ask people about a failure, it doesn't matter what the failure was. What you want to hear from them is what they learned from it, the steps they took and what they learned, and that they're taking personal responsibility. That shows insight and learning, and it's a fantastic question.
Exactly. And also, how are they keeping their skills up to date? What are they doing to better themselves? What are they reading? What conferences are they attending? What have they studied recently? What book have they, whatever it might be, but how are they keeping their skills relevant, and what are they doing individually to kind of own that and getting some insights there.
Fantastic. Look, it's 9:02, so I'm 2 minutes late, but audience, thank you. You've been fabulous. I felt like a bit like of an Oprah moment when you have the audience participating. It's absolutely brilliant. And to our incredible panel, thank you very much for giving up your time and your insights. I think this is a topic that could go on. I know when we originally chatted, it was like talking to a bunch of old friends and just talking about where we could go and what we could do, and challenging our thinking. Morgan Williams says, does everyone get a car? It's great. Absolutely. Contact our country director in Australia, Andrea McCutcheon. She'll love that. She'll get them ordered, all for you in a different colour. Everyone has said, I've had lots of feedback saying thanks, all great insight sharing. We're going to look at interviewing our fabulous panel individually, guys, because we do believe they've got so much to offer and we want to put that out there. So we'll be sharing that with channels. We've recorded this, so it will be available for you all to tap into. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And let's go make people feel uncomfortable, get agile, and make things happen. All right. See you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.